In a world filled with uncertainty and challenges, it's easy to feel lost or overwhelmed by the complexities of life. Yet, amidst these struggles, there is a powerful truth that can anchor our hearts and guide our steps: God's promises. Throughout the Bible, God speaks words of assurance, reminding us that no matter what we face, His plans for us are always filled with hope, purpose, and a future. Embracing God's promises is not just about reading Scripture. It's about deeply trusting that His words are true and choosing to live in alignment with His will. Whether you're navigating personal challenges, facing a difficult decision, or simply seeking peace in a chaotic world, understanding and accepting God's promises can bring a transformative sense of purpose and peace. In this journey, we'll explore how to replace fear with faith and embrace the fullness of God's promises in our lives. Jeremiah 29 is a profound passage from the Bible that speaks to people in the midst of uncertainty and exile, offering them a message of hope and divine assurance. It is a letter from the prophet Jeremiah to the exiled Israelites in Babylon, sent after they were taken captive following the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple. The Israelites were in a period of great suffering, longing for the restoration of their homeland. They had lost everything: their city, their temple, their way of life. In the midst of this despair, the prophet delivers a message from God that speaks to the deepest fears of the exiled people. The passage reminds them that despite their current circumstances, God has not abandoned them. Jeremiah 29 tells the Israelites that God has plans for their future, even though they are in a foreign land. Rather than focusing on an immediate return to their homeland, God instructs the people to settle in Babylon, build homes, plant gardens, and seek the welfare of the city. They are not to despair, but to engage with their current situation, trusting that God's plan for them extends beyond their current suffering. They are to thrive where they are, even if it is not where they want to be. This message is one of patience and trust. It encourages the people to take care of their families, to establish roots, and to believe that God is still at work in their lives, even in exile. In the heart of this passage is the famous verse, "For I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future." This verse offers the exiles a promise of restoration and renewal, even though they are in a place of pain and uncertainty. It reminds them that their suffering is not the end of their story. God has a long-term plan for them, one that goes beyond their immediate circumstances. This passage reassures them that despite the hardship they are enduring, God's intentions are always for their good. The Israelites' journey in exile is not a punishment, but part of God's greater plan, which includes a hopeful future for them. Jeremiah 29 is a message of hope for those who find themselves in times of waiting and hardship. It speaks to the importance of trusting in God's long-term plan, even when it is not immediately clear. C.S. Lewis on trusting God's plan. Trusting God's plan can be one of the hardest aspects of faith, especially when life takes unexpected turns. It's natural to question why things happen the way they do, why prayers seem unanswered, and why suffering exists. Yet throughout history, believers have been called to trust that God is working in ways beyond human understanding. This idea is beautifully captured in Jeremiah 29 verse 11, where God reassures His people that He has plans to prosper them and give them hope, even in the midst of their exile. C.S. Lewis often wrote about the nature of faith and the struggle of trust. One of his most famous reflections on this is that God's plan is not always what we expect, but it is always good. He compared trusting God to a child learning to walk. Sometimes, the parent must let go for the child to grow, even if the child stumbles. Similarly, God allows us to go through seasons of uncertainty so that our faith can be strengthened. One of the biggest obstacles to trusting God's plan is the presence of suffering. It's easy to have faith when things are going well, but much harder when faced with pain, loss, or disappointment. Yet, throughout the Bible, suffering is often a pathway to greater blessings. Joseph was betrayed by his brothers and sold into slavery. Yet God used his hardships to elevate him to a position where he could save many lives. The Israelites endured 70 years of exile, but God was preparing them for restoration. Even Jesus himself suffered, but his suffering brought salvation to the world. Lewis emphasized that suffering is not a sign of God's absence, but rather a tool for transformation. He famously wrote that pain is God's megaphone to rouse a deaf world. It often forces people to turn to him, to seek his guidance, and to rely on him in ways they never will have otherwise. This doesn't mean that God causes suffering, but he can use it for a greater purpose. Another key aspect of trusting God's plan is surrender. Many people try to control their own destiny, making plans and setting goals without considering God's will. But true peace comes from surrendering those plans to him, believing that his way is higher. Proverbs 3 verses 5 to 6 reminds us to trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight. This means that even when things don't make sense, God is still in control. Ultimately, trusting God's plan requires faith, patience, and a willingness to let go of fear. Just as the Israelites had to wait for their promised restoration, believers today must sometimes wait for God's perfect timing. But his promises never fail. Whether the road is smooth or difficult, God's plan is always leading his people toward a future filled with hope, purpose, and his unfailing love. Replacing worry with worship is a powerful concept that can transform the way we approach the challenges and uncertainties of life. Worry often arises from a sense of fear, doubt, or a lack of control over our circumstances. When we face difficulties, it's easy to become consumed with anxiety, focusing on the worst-case scenarios and what could go wrong. However, the Bible offers a different approach, one where instead of being overwhelmed by worry, we turn our attention to God in worship. Worship in this context is more than just singing songs or attending church services. It is an act of surrender, an acknowledgement that God is sovereign over all things, and that his plan for us is good, even when we cannot see it clearly. When we replace worry with worship, we are shifting our focus from the problems we face to the greatness of God. Worship allows us to refocus our hearts and minds on God's promises and faithfulness. It reminds us that we are not alone in our struggles and that God is always with us. In Philippians 4 verses 6 to 7, the Apostle Paul encourages believers to replace anxiety with prayer and thanksgiving, bringing their concerns before God. In doing so, the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard their hearts and minds. Worship in the midst of worry becomes a form of trust, declaring that even though we may not have the answers or solutions, we believe that God is in control and that he will provide for us. When we engage in worship, whether through music, prayer, or quiet reflection, we remind ourselves that God is worthy of our trust. Worship helps us gain perspective, lifting our eyes from the temporary troubles of this world to the eternal truths of who God is. It allows us to place our worries in his hands, trusting that he will work all things together for good. Replacing worry with worship does not mean that our problems disappear, but it shifts our posture from one of fear to one of faith. It helps us move from a place of anxiety to a place of peace, knowing that God is with us in every situation, guiding us and providing for us according to his perfect will. Through worship, we find hope and strength to face whatever challenges lie ahead. Walking in confidence instead of fear is a transformative approach to life that reflects a deep trust in God's presence and promises. Fear often arises when we focus on our limitations, the unknown, or the potential outcomes of situations beyond our control. It can paralyze us, prevent us from taking action, and rob us of peace. Confidence, on the other hand, is rooted in a firm belief that we are not facing life's challenges alone. When we choose to walk in confidence, we acknowledge that God has equipped us with everything we need to face the unknown. This kind of confidence is not arrogance or self-reliance, but rather a humble assurance that, with God by our side, we can navigate any circumstance. In the Bible, we are repeatedly reminded not to fear because God is with us. In Isaiah 41 verse 10, God promises, "So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." This assurance shifts our focus from our fears to God's power and presence. When we internalize this truth, fear begins to lose its grip on us. Confidence in God's protection and provision becomes the foundation for how we live, rather than the anxiety about what could go wrong. Walking in confidence also means acknowledging our weaknesses, but choosing to trust in God's strength. The Apostle Paul writes in 2 Corinthians 12 verse 9 that God's grace is sufficient for us, and His power is made perfect in weakness. This paradox teaches us that it's okay to admit our vulnerabilities, as they create an opportunity for God to display His strength through us. The confidence we walk with is not in our ability to handle everything on our own, but in the certainty that God will carry us through. As we walk in confidence, we begin to embrace life with a sense of purpose, knowing that God is directing our steps. Fear loses its ability to dictate our decisions, and we move forward with clarity and assurance. This confidence empowers us to take risks, face challenges head-on, and step into the future with hope and courage. It allows us to trust that God will work all things together for good, and we can confidently walk in His will, knowing that His plans are always better than our own. The power of prayer in uncertain times is immeasurable. In moments of fear, doubt, or confusion, prayer becomes a lifeline that connects us to God, offering comfort, guidance, and peace. When life feels out of control and we are unsure of the future, prayer allows us to express our concerns, seek understanding, and place our trust in a higher power. It's a way of surrendering our worries and acknowledging that we do not have all the answers, but God does. Through prayer, we invite God's presence into our circumstances, allowing His peace to surpass our understanding and His wisdom to direct our steps. In uncertain times, prayer becomes more than just a ritual. It's an act of faith. It is a recognition that we do not navigate the challenges of life on our own, but with God's help. The Bible encourages us to pray continually and bring our anxieties before God, trusting that He hears us. Philippians 4 verses 6 to 7 reminds us to be anxious for nothing, but in everything, by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. This verse reassures us that prayer is a powerful tool to calm our hearts and minds, lifting the burden of uncertainty. When we pray, we are not only asking for help, but also aligning our hearts with God's will, surrendering our plans to His greater purpose. The act of praying during challenging times has the power to shift our perspective. Rather than focusing on the uncertainty, prayer helps us focus on God's faithfulness and His promises. It reminds us that He is sovereign over all situations and nothing takes Him by surprise. Through prayer, we find comfort in knowing that God is in control and His plans for us are good, even when we cannot see the way forward. Prayer transforms our anxiety into peace, our doubt into trust, and our fear into courage. It's a powerful reminder that we are never alone in our struggles and that God's presence is always with us, offering hope and strength when we need it most. In uncertain times, prayer empowers us to face life's challenges with confidence, knowing that God is listening, guiding, and working on our behalf. Embracing God's promise for your life is a transformative journey that invites you to fully trust in His plans and purposes, even when the road ahead seems unclear or uncertain. God's promises are not mere words spoken in passing. They are steadfast declarations that are filled with hope, purpose, and direction for those who choose to embrace them. Throughout the Bible, God speaks directly to his people, assuring them that his intentions are always for their good, even when circumstances may suggest otherwise. The challenge is not in God's ability to fulfill his promises, but in our willingness to fully trust and embrace them, especially when we face trials or adversity. One of the key aspects of embracing God's promise is recognizing that his plans for us are greater than we can imagine. In Jeremiah 29 verse 11, God says, "For I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future." This promise is not just for the Israelites who were exiled in Babylon, but for every believer. It serves as a reminder that no matter how difficult life may seem, God's ultimate plan is one of hope, restoration, and prosperity. Trusting in this truth allows us to let go of our fear and embrace the future with confidence. When we acknowledge that God's plan for us is far better than anything we could plan for ourselves, we find peace in knowing that we are in his capable hands. Embracing God's promise also requires surrender. To fully accept his plans for our lives, we must release our own control and agendas. This can be challenging, especially when we feel the urge to dictate our own paths or when things do not unfold as we expect. However, surrendering to God's will is an act of faith that opens the door to his transformative power. It is in these moments of surrender that we are able to experience the depth of God's love and provision. We are reminded that his timing is perfect, and while we may not always understand the reasons behind our circumstances, we can trust that he is working for our good. Moreover, embracing God's promise involves understanding that his presence is constant, and he will never leave us nor forsake us. In moments of doubt, it can be easy to question whether God is truly with us, especially during seasons of hardship or loss. Yet, the Bible assures us that God is always faithful to his word. In Isaiah 41 verse 10, God promises, "So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." This assurance of God's presence and support is crucial when embracing his promises. Knowing that we are never alone in our journey allows us to face challenges with renewed strength and courage. Embracing God's promise for your life is an invitation to trust in his sovereignty, his faithfulness, and his perfect love. It is about aligning our hearts with his will and choosing to believe that no matter what we face, God is with us, and he is working everything for our good. When we hold on to this truth, we can walk forward in faith, knowing that God's promises are sure, and his plan for our lives is one of ultimate hope and fulfillment. In a world filled with uncertainty and challenges, it's easy to feel lost or overwhelmed by the complexities of life. Yet, amidst these struggles, there is a powerful truth that can anchor our hearts and guide our steps: God's promises. Throughout the Bible, God speaks words of assurance, reminding us that no matter what we face, his plans for us are always filled with hope, purpose, and a future. Embracing God's promises is not just about reading Scripture. It's about deeply trusting that his words are true and choosing to live in alignment with his will. Whether you're navigating personal challenges, facing a difficult decision, or simply seeking peace in a chaotic world, understanding and accepting God's promises can bring a transformative sense of purpose and peace. In this journey, we'll explore how to replace fear with faith and embrace the fullness of God's promises in our lives. If this message touched your heart, leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear how God's guidance has shaped your journey. Don't forget to subscribe for more inspiration and encouragement.